Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today I'm going to Sanhedrin daf Hey. We are going to begin on the bottom of Dalad Amid Beis. Tanarbana, Dini Momunus B'Shloisha. When it comes to all cases of monetary courts issues, you need to have three judges. As we continue Hamad Aleph, however, if you have someone who is an expert, he could actually do it by himself. And on this, Rashi explains, because the pasuk says "B'sek tishbait, v'ksavar ein kan ir parshios." So, according to the lashain of tishbait, it sounds like even one person can judge, but obviously he has to know what he's talking about. Omer Rav Nachman k'goyna na, Rav Nachman speaking about himself, done dinin mamonis b'yachidi. I have the ability to do this. V'chein Omer Rav Chia k'goyna na, done dinin mamonis b'yachidi. Which is not a form of gaiva, it's just a mitzias. They are experts. Does it mean that they've learned all the different sugyas of dinim, visavirna, and they understand how to be able to add on to it, to be able to explain the reasonings based on their own understanding and knowledge? V'nakitna rishusa, here's a key line. Says Rashi, you actually have to get permission. Is it true? Do you have to maybe you have to get permission? Even if you have all this knowledge and expertise, maybe you need to ask the Reish Galusa, who is in charge of Bavel, to be able to paskin that way. But let's say you weren't given permission from the Reish Galusa, Daini lo dina, so then your din is not a din. And then they basically have to go somewhere else. So or maybe even if you did it by yourself without permission from the Reish Galusa, it still counts. Toshma. Done dina. So he paskin a particular manner. V'ta, and he made a mistake. Also made the Rav Yosef from Malay said like this: if they accepted your words unconditionally, then lo tashlim, then you don't have to go and pay for your mistake. Ve'ilo zil shlim, but if not, then you do. Says Rashi, ve'ilo kiblo ta'ischa lehem, if they didn't accept the fact that if you would make a mistake that they would be okay with it. Miu mehader dina loy. However, to throw out the entire ruling, that we don't say. So we see that itak is a din. Shemamina, let's finish up the Gemara. Kilo nakad rishus the dina dina shemamina. The kilo nakad rishus the dina dina v'loy mahader. So it's not that the whole case is thrown out, but there could be a distinction whether or not you actually have to pay for the mistake that you made as a being done lichidi. Omer Rav, Haiman de boila meidan dina, someone who wishes to act as a judge, v'ita, and if he makes a mistake, mi boila miftara, and he wants to make sure, even if he makes a mistake, that he's not going to have to pay anything. So lishka rishus mebe Reish Galusa. So in that case, you'd actually have to get permission from Reish Galusa, basically saying that if in fact you make a mistake, that you're covered. You don't have to worry about it. V'chein Omer Shmuel lishka rishus mebe Reish Galusa. Again, you have to ask permission. Now, Pshita mahacha lahacha mahasa mahasa mahani. I understand if you go, let's say, if you're in Bavel, get permission from the Reish Galusa in Bavel to go anywhere in Bavel, or for that matter, mahasam from the Nasi, from Eretz Yisrael, the leader of Eretz Yisrael is called the Nasi. Then you have the Rosh Beis, the Rosh Av, Rosh Beistin. So it'll work. In Eretz Yisrael, he has jurisdiction in Eretz Yisrael. Bavel. Now, umahacha hasam nami mahani. And if the Reish Galusa in Bavel gave you permission, then you could even pass in Eretz Yisrael, even if you make a mistake, it's not going to be a problem. The hacha shevet was mechaykik. When it comes to Bavel, it's like a shevet, like a strong stick. In Eretz Yisrael, it's mechaykik, you're considered like the law. Kedesanya, Yosef Shevim Yehuda. You will not remove a shevet from Yehuda, which is referring to the psak in Bavel. Elu Rashi Gol Yeshiva Bavel. Shechaydin es Yisrael b'shevet. They rule harshly literally with a stick. Rashi says Lashon Sharara, a language of power and control. Maybe Banav Shel Hillel. These are the children of Hillel, Shmulam and Taibarabim. This is in Eretz Yisrael, which is not on the same level as being Mechaykik. Okay, so there it's not a kasha. Now, however, what if you got permission in Eretz Yisrael by the Nasi? Can you now go to Bavel and pass? Going to make a mistake, you're not going to be held accountable. Tashma. The Rabbi Bar Chana done din of atah. He made a mistake. Also, Kamei de Rav Chia. He went to Rav Chia in Eretz Yisrael. Malay. He said, "Ikabel chalayhu lo shlim v'lo zil shlim." It says clearly that if they didn't accept you, then you have to pay, which means that even though you got permission from the Nos in Eretz Yisrael, but since you went to Bavel, that's like a Yerida, if you will, and therefore because of that, you would still have to pay. V'harabba barchan rishusa havi nokit. He obviously got permission by the Nasi. Shemam and Hasam Hach. When you go from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, lo mahani shmami na. Question 12. Imahani kabos rishus ladin mahachal hasam mahasma umi hasam mahacha umadua. So from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael it helps. Eretz Yisrael to Bavel doesn't help. The Bavel shevet tahainu harishus harishrara lahafkir. The Eretz Yisrael mechaykek tahainu shrara muetas. Okay. So for the Gemara v'lo mahani, you're telling me that it doesn't work from someone who goes. Let's look at Rashi first. Shema mino mahasam lahacha loy mahani the Rabbi Bar Chana rishusa havi nokit mirebi did nasi Eretz Yisrael hoya. The Rebbe was the nasi of Eretz Yisrael. He was obviously given rishus, and he went to Bavel. That doesn't help. So v'lo mahani, is that true? It doesn't help. Rabba Bar Rav Huna ki havi minsi bahadodi the Bei Reish Kalusa, when they were engaged in disputes among the Reish Kalusa. Who Minaichu, from you, Nekitna Rishusa. You're given permission. Nekitna Rishusa, Ma'alba Mari. You're given Rishus. Lamanachan Rishusa. And says Rashi, any kofel fulchem. Rather, Ma'alba Mari Marav, Marav Marav Chia, Marav Chia Marabi. So we see clearly that it does work in from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. So, b'milsa di alma hu de'oikim lahu. What does that mean? So it just means that he was just basically saying words, but doesn't necessarily mean that he would not have to pay. He still would have to pay because he went from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. Excuse me. So if it doesn't help when you make a mistake, so Rabbi Barchan Rishus and Nakal Lamali. What's the whole point of getting Rishus by Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael when you know you're going to Bavel anyway, and it's not going to help because you're going to still have the requirement of having to pay if you make a mistake? So what's the whole purpose of getting permission from someone in Eretz Yisrael when he has no dominion, and apparently there's no nafgamina for you being saved in Bavel? My answer is it does help with Yaros Oimdim al Gvulin, regarding the cities that are by the boundaries, so the bordering cities to Eretz Yisrael, so he would be patur to pay. So my Rishusa, what exactly does this whole notion mean of permission? So what is that with regard specifically of Rabba Bar Chana? So Kihavi Nochas Rabba Bar Chana LeBavel, that when he went to Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, or Malay Rabbi Chil Rebbe, he said to Rebbe, he said, quote, Ben Achi, my brother's son, which is a beautiful language, Yorid LeBavel, we're going down to Bavel. Yoira. So he asked Rebbe, do I have the permission to paskin? So he answers, Yoira, you may. Yodin, can I judge? Yodin, you can answer. Which is Yatir B'chayris. Can I Matir B'chayris? So what exactly is the difference between Yoira? So Yoira is Isra Heter. Omahem Rebbe Yoira. You can answer these. And Yodin is Rishus V'yifter Moshalim, that you wouldn't have to pay. However, when it comes to being Yatir B'chayris, Yatir, he also allowed him to do that. Says Rashi, Yira B'mumin he can look at blemishes. V'im kavuahu, if they're permanent blemishes, yatirenu sheichtai, you can shech them. To be yoyim derebi, elo b'chor takana ad sheyipol bo mum, di achar churban hoya. You had to wait until, because it was after the churban, so you couldn't bring this as a carbon, a b'chor. So therefore, because of that, you had to wait until it developed a mum. So therefore, you had to see, and you had to matir the animal out to a mum. B'derech agav, when it comes to getting smicha, the smichas are called yori, yodin, ravumanig, but yoira, it doesn't really mention about ravumanig, which is just the lower level of smicha. But usually when you learn your day, it's because it's yori. But that's the name of the smicha. But really, yoira, it's a question and an answer. Basically, what the smicha is saying is you're asking your Rebbe Rishus, do I have the right to paskin? Yara, you may paskin. Yodin, do I have the right to be a judge? Yodin, you have the right to be a judge. Most people aren't aware that there's actually different levels of what smicha is, basically what smicha nowadays is your Rebbe giving you reshus to be able to paskin. That's what it basically is referring to. Yat b'chayres yater, ki havi nochas Rav Bavel, Armule Rav Chiel Rav Ben Achaisi. Again, he calls him the same language of Ben Achaisi, as we saw before. He's Ben Achin as Ben Achaisi. Yara LaBavel, Yara, Yadin, Yat b'chayres al yater. So he said, no, you are not allowed to do that. So Gemara's going to explain why he was adamant not to allow him to be mat b'chayres. So Ma'ishno Lamar de Kakari Ben Achi, how come, as we saw before, that when Reb Chia spoke to Rebbe, he called him Ben Achi, and then when it came to Rav going to Bavel, so Rav Chia said to Rav Ben Achaisi. So Ma'ishno Lamar de Kakari Ben Achaisi. Maybe that's just how they were related. V'yermar Ivoy v'chana v'shiloi Marta Rav Chia kuhu b'nei Abba bar Acha Karsalam Kfar Havi Nikifri Chavi. These people, Avoy, says Rashi, Avud the Rav, the father of Rav, as it's brought down in the beginning of Pesachtas Pesachim. Chana, which is the Avua the Rabbah, right? Maybe I'm mispronouncing the word. That's what it sounds like. Mikifri, from this location. So they all basically came from the same place. So Rav bar Achua Dahavi bar Achte, because he was also the sister's son. Rabba bar Chana bar Achua Dola bar Achte. He was not also the sister's son. Okay. Alternatively, as we continue to Haim and Beis, Al Shem Chachmasoi. The reason why he was called this is actually another compliment that Rav was a greater Chacham. The Gemara in Kedushin quotes as well that just as you know whether or not you're allowed to marry your sister, it's obvious. Someone asks you a kasha like that, you know the answer immediately. That's how all Torah should be. And therefore, to be able to be called this shows his godless and Torah. Yata b'chayres al yata. So my time, why wasn't he able to do that? So maybe he wasn't knowledgeable enough. We already said that he was exceedingly smart. Maybe he just wasn't an expert in the dinim of these particular blemishes of a b'char. I was actually by a shepherd for 18 months. I grew up. So, which is unbelievable. You spend 18 months hanging out with a shepherd in order to be able to know what is a mum kavua, what's not a mum kavua, which then itself stands by itself, the godless, to recognize you can even hang out with a shepherd, seemingly an individual who doesn't have the greatest level of knowledge, but it's just someone who takes care of animals, but that person has what to offer. He actually spent 18 months of his life learning from him. Anyway, obviously he knew the answers of what was the dinim of a mum. He did this in order to be able to show kavod to Rabbi Bar Chana. Says Rashi, Kadeshin Gboy B'nei Bavel Kavod Shavakle Hai Chashivusa. In order to be able to give chashivus to Rabbah, he left this thing distinct. Dil Rav Havi Nahagi Be Yakar Belav Hachi, because Rav would have been given honor anyway. Okay. V'boy Sema Mishum Ha Gufed the Rav Bikia Bumumitve, that he was more of an expert. The reason why he said don't do it is because Rav was a greater expert. The Shari Mumi, because he was Plumfakir, because he was such an expert, the Shari Mumi the Yadi Inchi, he's going to end up saying that certain things are not a mum, right, and he'll matter things, which is absolutely the truth. But the Amriki Agam the Shar Rab, people will say, oh wow, this was allowed, Yosel Mishri Mum Oiver. And they're going to end up thinking a mum oiver is also like a mum kavua. But he was such a knowledgeable, such expertise, that people will misconstrue that level of knowledge and they'll not understand what is a mum kavua. He knows what's a mum kavua and what's a mum oiver. But other people will learn from him and extrapolate the wrong halachos. So therefore, because goof of his expertise, that he may end up being so makel, but he's not really being makel, he's being correct. Therefore, he said you shouldn't paskin. Yaira, yaira. So igamer shusa lumli. If you're given permission, lumli mishkol, mishum ma'isa shahaya. So exactly, if he was already given permission to paskin, so the question is, why do we have this concern of getting rishus? Igamer. If he's so knowledgeable, then Rishus Alamuli, Lamishka, why does he have to even ask permission? So Rabbi went to a place, they were kneading their doughs in impurity, in Tuma. And apparently they were not so makbid in their kalim. So I understand what are you doing? You're using this liquid which is mamish, making everything tameh. Amrulo, they still don't understand. Talmud Echad Balakan, there was a student that came here, Bahoyrulanu, and he paskin for us that maybe tsoyim in machshirin. And I said it quickly on purpose. Maybe tsoyim, which is water from Rashi, is an agam, swamp water, is not machshir kabatuma. But that's not true, because it's regular water. Of course it's machshir kabatuma. Who made beitsim, it was actually eggs, says Rashi, we need with this swamp water. But the truth is that we're talking about eggs. So what was their mistake? They thought they were saying swamp water. But the truth is it was really eggs, liquid that comes from an egg. The liquid which comes from an egg, taka is not yad shachadam, is not one of the liquids that's makabel tuma. It's true, but they didn't hear it that way. They didn't hear the word beitzim. They heard b'tzayim. So because of that, you have to be very careful to make sure that you have your Rebbe's permission and that everyone's able to hear everything. Okay, darshulhu. Fine. Darshulhu may beitzim darshulhu. If you know someone may b'tzayim karmer. That's one mistake. The Tonami, they made a second mistake. Baha may karmioinu may piga psulin mipnei shehin may. I don't want to say the wrong word here. B'tzayim. So this water that comes from marshland is considered to be pasul. Says Rashi, Lamei chatos, for the liquids for the chatos for the paraduma, because they're made b'tzayim, because they are swamp waters. And when it comes to mechatos, it's necessary for it to be mayim chayim. The inusavar midolagabi chatos psili, the fact that it's only an issue regarding to mechatos, akshuri namulo makshuri. It must be it's not makshur kabatuma. that the whole issue is mechatas, so it must be that it's really maksha kabatuma. V'lohi hasam in chatas being in mayim chayim. The only reason why we make a distinction, is because mayim, when it comes to mechatas, it has to come from spring water. Hachashuri koldahu makshuri. But when it comes to swamp water, it could be makshuri even the smallest amount. Okay, so therefore, because of that, it's better that you should get reshus from your Rebbe. Says Rashi, important Rashi, v'chi yoyiv le rabba reshusa. Meidak dayik bey is going to be more particular. She'l'shayno patuach, that you're going to be more careful how you speak. Lo yitu hashaymim es devarav, so that people are not going to misconstrue your words. Okay, so that's the same idea over here. He was, even though he was such a baki in the laws of b'chayr, of what's a mum oiver, what's a mum kavua, that wasn't that in itself is problematic. Okay, because people are going to learn incorrectly from you. Talmud al yoyra elim kein nektar rishus meraboy. That's the reason why a Talmud should not paskin unless he gets permission from his teacher. Tanachum berei de Rabbi Yomi ikla lechater. It's an older Gemara. I want to make sure I'm saying the right language over here. So you have this sage. Tanach where to Rabbi Yomi, he went l'chater, darshahu, and he darshan the following: Mutter lil soy schitim b'Pesach. This is more Sachim Daf Mem. You're allowed to soak, says Rashi, lishroi smad ma'im, a little water, l'kaitshan b'machteshes, grind up in a grinder, l'chayshinan l'chimutz. We're not concerned this will become chametz. Hoy v'kaitshan miyad, since you're grinding it up immediately, so you can soak it up in water and grind it up right away. It's not a problem. Okay. Amrulo lav rav mani the min sur ika hacha. Isn't this person such and such a person there? But Tanya Talmud al yara halacha b'makam rabbi. Elim kein hayaracha b'menu shosh parsais keneged machani Yisrael. So I don't understand, why did you say this? L'chayra, you shouldn't have done so because you're close to your Rebbe. Says Rashi, you have to be keneged machani Yisrael. The Cholman deboy milsa ozlo gabi Moshe. Because anyone had a kasha used to go to Moshe Rabbeinu. If Moshe Rabbeinu is far away, then that would be an exception. Okay. I didn't realize. Okay. This was a person who was in the cemetery. Aren't you a kohen? What are you doing over here? Yeah, I am. And the father of this person was a gavei naim, which means he was a haughty individual. Let's slow down. Havi nosan einav begrushim chiloi. He set his eyes to divorce, and then he became a chol. So even though it's true, maybe he's a kohen, but he's a chol. Look at Rashi. Afagav the Rabbi Chia Talmud the Rabbi Havi. Even though Rabbi Chia was a student of Rabbi, V'mkaima the Rabbi Havi, it was in the place of Rabbi. Havi loy cholok loy kavel the Rabbi. Hafresh zem min ha'isur. In afrushim isur ein kan mar halachim the Rabbi. So as brought down, Rashi brings down, till we be mafreshim isur, that's not considered to be a psak. V'rois a koyin oimid b'ksas ha'ir shechutz l'gvul Eretz Yisrael amruloi v'hari hu zeh Eretz Oamim shegozul ha'atoma k'beis ha'kavodas. So he says that this is a situation where he looked like he was in the Eretz Ha'amim, which there was a gezerah comparable to the basic varis. So it says Rashi, "V'nasa mimenu nolati v'harini chol." I'm a chol, so that's why I'm over there. So pshita lepalga hakaimer de mahani. So let's look at Rashi. Pshita lepalga kagoin, says Rashi. Rav Yoiv v'hu reshusa l'midon v'hu l'hater b'chayris. He gave him permission to teach certain things, but not to be mater b'chayris. So l'palga hu ka'ayim redemahani, that's considered to be a good smicha, because you said he could at least do something. He had certain things he can do, certain things he can't do. Al Tanai Mai. So you could paskin lapalga, but how about Al Tanai? It says Rashi going ad shana or ad shnatayim yoser. You can be a rabbi for 1 or 2 years, and that's it. Does that help? It says Rashi, Mahani b'tayich hazman o lo. Could he actually paskin during those times or not? So Tashma Diamalei, Rav Yochanan and Rav Shimon, Hari Ata Birshosenu Ad Shetavatzlenu. You basically have permission until you come to me. In other words, he did give some type of certain time frame of how long he could paskin. Gufoimer Shmuel Beis Shadanu Dinam Din El Shanikra Beis in Chotzov. So even though we mentioned you should have 3 judges, however, if you have 2, that works. However, you're considered like a brazen Beis Din. Yosef Rav Nachman Kermel Hu Shmai Soes Rebel Rav Nachman Afilu Shnaim Zakin O Shnaim Chayovin. Even if you have 2 people say good, 2 people say bad, guilty. The third person says I don't know. Yosivo Hadayonim. So we add other judges. Now Isa Lahavi Kishnaim Shadonu. Understand? If 2 is enough, so if you have 2 that say yes or 2 that say no, and then you have a third guy that just is unsure, so why do you have to get more people? 2 is enough anyway. Because originally the mindset was to have 3 people paskening, and therefore if one person says no, that doesn't count. Never you need to have another person to take its place. And therefore, maybe you're right, l'chatchila, if you only had 2, even though it's based in chotzev, but it still works. But since you started off with 3, obviously that's what was intended. Shani halsam ni mikore daita the tlasi yisivi hachalav daita the tlasi yisivi. Esvei. So he asked the following question. So when it comes to the din, that you require 3 judges. Upshara b'shnayim. When it comes to a pshara, making some form of a compromise, 2. The yafa koyach pshara koyach hadin. At a certain level, pshara, compromise is greater than din. Shnayim shadanu. When you have 2 people that judge, bali dinim yichayin laksalahen bahen. When it comes to 2 people that judge, the baladinim are able to retract and say it's not a din. But when you have 2 people that make a pshara, they can't back it down. So again, the kasha is, what do you mean? How is that true that 2 people, when it comes to a din, that baladim yichayin l'achsabehen? I thought we said that you can just have 2 judges and that's good enough entirely. So how would they be able to retract? As we continue Davav Amad Al V'chitema, maybe it's just a machlokus over here, doesn't agree to it. Yom Rabbi Yavo Shnaim Shadanu L'divrei HaKoyel Ein Divrei Din. He actually says L'divrei HaKoyel. Everyone says that it's not good. So Gavar Karomis? I understand you're asking a kasha one person onto another person. You can't ask a kasha one person onto another person. It's not a stira from one person to the next, and therefore, okay, it's a machlokus. Okay, we're going to stop there. Question. Okay, we saw question 12. That was the only question. Question TA 14. Omer Shmuel, Beis Shadanu Dinam Din. Be'ez Oifen Maida Shmuel De'en Shnaim Yechoyin Lifts like a din. Okay, which is what we just saw. So the answer is Pashit Im Yoshim Yikar Gimel V'Yomer Echad in Yodeya. So in that case, TA 14, since on the onset of the Mikara Daita the Tlasi Sivi, Hachalav Daita the Tlasi Sivi. So in that situation, that will not work. And in that case, as we said, if one says in Yodea, Yoseifu Hadayonim, then you have to add on 2 judges. TB 15. Ha'im Mahani Kabos Rishos L'doin Mahachal Hasam or Mahasam Mahachal Madua. So that we already had, which is same as question 12. This is TB 15. This is what I wrote. Mebavel Eretz Yisrael Mahani. V'lo Eretz Yisrael Mebavel. Mene the Ikar Hadayonim Mebavel v'lo Eretz Yisrael Mepasim Chaykik u'Mishevet. Okay, that's good enough. Good. Rabbi Giver. Let's see. Umandi yomer the mumchel rabim donafil yachidi ha'im be'inan shehei nakita reshusa. Does he need to get reshus? I wrote just circled no. Ha'im reshusa the nakim Eretz Yisrael lepaitro bebavel. No. Okay. Lamandi lama will nas. That's for sure is no. The first one I'm not so sure. Lama will nasan Rabbi or Rav smicha biyatir b'b'chayris. Either to make a chilk between Rabbi and the other who gave smicha, who was yatir b'chayris, or because since Rabbi is such a baki, right? Well, nasan Rabbi or Rav. That it should say that Rav was such a baki, right? Because it says over here, V'yom Rav Shmeina Aser Chadash. V'yom Rav Shmeina. This is talking about Rav. Okay, I wrote Rebbe in this test. Okay, since Rav, just correct that one word, is such a baki in B'chayris, people may misapply his words for wrong things. Okay, Ma'u halacha b'dinim she'en seimchin shetoy b'divri Mishnah. Okay, that we didn't see yet. Adkan.